For years he tried. He worked harder than most people you'll ever meet. He woke up early, stayed up late, read every book, took every course, and yet nothing changed. Success always seemed one step ahead of him, close enough to see, but never close enough to touch. He watched others rise while he stayed where he was, trapped between effort and frustration. And one day, tired of trying, he almost gave up. But before he did, something happened. A single shift, not in his work, not in his luck, but in his mind. He realized he had been trying to change his results without changing his thinking. And that was the moment everything began to turn. See, life doesn't respond to effort alone. If it did, every hard-working person would be rich, happy, and fulfilled. But life responds to alignment, when what you think, believe, and expect finally match the actions you take. Before this shift, he worked from pressure. After it, he worked from vision. He stopped asking, why is it not working? And started asking, what would it look like if it worked perfectly? He began to see success in his mind before it appeared in reality. And that single act changed the quality of everything he did. He wasn't chasing anymore. He was creating. From that day on, the same doors that once stayed shut began to open, not because the world changed, but because he did. That's the hidden law. The moment you shift your thinking from struggle to creation, the universe rearranges itself to match your new vibration. He didn't need more years of trying. He just needed that one shift from forcing life to flowing with it. So, if you've been trying for years, if you've worked hard and still can't see results, maybe it's not about doing more. Maybe it's about seeing differently. Because one shift, one clear, definite change in your thought can do what 1,000 days of effort never could. For years he tried. Every single day began with determination and ended with exhaustion. He worked longer hours than anyone around him, studied harder, pushed further, and sacrificed more. Yet no matter how much he gave, success seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. Every step forward brought 2 steps back. Every plan that seemed perfect on paper fell apart in reality. And though he never said it aloud, deep inside he began to wonder if life had simply chosen someone else for greatness. He was doing everything right, or so he thought. But nothing seemed to move. He watched others rise with ease. Some seemed to succeed almost effortlessly, as if life itself opened doors for them. And the question haunted him, why not me? What am I missing? He kept trying to outwork the problem, thinking that maybe, just maybe, one more late night or one more risk would turn it around. But it didn't. The harder he pushed, the further away the goal seemed to drift. The frustration built until effort turned to anger, and anger turned to doubt. Then one day something shifted, not in his circumstances, not in his work, but in his understanding. He realized that for years, he had been trying to change his results without changing his thoughts. He had been trying to improve his outer world, while his inner world stayed the same. He had been focused entirely on what he was doing, never stopping to ask who was being while he did it. And that was the moment that changed everything. He began to see a truth that few ever discover. Life does not respond to effort alone, it responds to alignment. He saw that no matter how many hours he worked, if his mind was still rooted in fear, doubt, and lack, his results would always reflect that. He understood that success was never a matter of luck or chance, but of harmony between thought, belief, and action. That single shift, from trying harder to thinking clearer, was the beginning of transformation. He stopped asking why things weren't working and started asking how he could see them differently. Instead of waking up with anxiety about what might go wrong, he began his mornings with a quiet image of everything going right. He started to see success first in his mind, to feel it before he lived it. He stopped chasing results and started creating them internally. The difference was subtle but powerful. He moved from striving to imagining, from pressure to purpose. Soon, the same work that once felt heavy began to feel inspired. The same actions produced different outcomes, not because they changed, but because he changed. The energy behind them was new. His belief had shifted from "I hope it works" to "it's already working," and the universe, as if responding to this newfound clarity, began to open doors that were invisible before. Opportunities appeared where he once saw none. People began to notice. Things began to move. He realized that all along, the key was never in doing more, but in becoming more aware, more intentional, more aligned. The one shift that changed everything was not a secret technique, not a hidden strategy, but a mental turning point, the realization that thoughts create conditions, not the other way around. That life is a mirror, and whatever you consistently project inward will eventually appear outward. He no longer fought against life. He began to work with it. When things didn't go as planned, he no longer saw failure, only feedback. Every challenge became a signal pointing him toward deeper clarity. Every delay became preparation for something greater. His confidence grew, not because he had achieved everything yet, but because he finally understood how achievement truly worked. He learned that wealth, success, happiness, all of it, flows to those who first created in their minds. He learned that trying to change your life without changing your thoughts is like trying to change the reflection without touching the mirror. It cannot be done. The real work was internal. And once he embraced that, everything external began to follow. He stopped defining himself by his past attempts and started defining himself by his future vision. He replaced old mental patterns of doubt with thoughts of certainty. He began to expect success instead of hoping for it. And that single shift, the decision to master his mind rather than his circumstances, was the dividing line between years of struggle and a life of flow. He understood now that the power had always been his. The struggle wasn't a punishment, it was preparation. The failures weren't final, they were shaping his awareness. The long road of frustration was only leading him to the moment he would finally see that he had never been unlucky. He had simply been unaligned. And once he aligned, life responded immediately. What once seemed impossible began to unfold with ease. The same world, the same effort, the same man, only a different mind. And that made all the difference. For years he lived with the same thought every morning, the thought that tomorrow would finally be different. Each sunrise carried the promise of change, yet each sunset brought the same quiet disappointment. He had goals, he had ambition, and he worked with relentless determination, but life seemed unmoved by his effort. Every project he started collapsed under its own weight. Every new idea burned bright for a moment and then faded. He convinced himself that success was about time, that if he just stayed in motion long enough, things would eventually fall into place. But time passed and nothing changed. He found himself wondering if perhaps he was missing something invisible, something deeper than action itself. He followed every rule society taught him. Work hard, stay disciplined, be patient. But deep inside, he knew he was still fighting against an unseen current. The harder he tried to push forward, the stronger that current pushed back. He read books, listened to advice, and changed strategies countless times, but none of it reached the root. There was always a gap between what he wanted and what he achieved. Then one day, after yet another plan failed, he stopped asking, "What should I do?" and began to ask, "What should I believe?" That was the turning point. It was in that quiet question that he saw the truth. He realized that his outer world was not the cause of his failure. It was the reflection of his inner one. His results were not random, they were perfectly consistent with his dominant thoughts. He had been trying to build success on top of a foundation of doubt. Every time he took action, part of his mind whispered that it probably wouldn't work. Every time he dreamed, another part reminded him of every past mistake. He had been fighting himself without realizing it, and when the mind is divided, no amount of effort can create unity in the results. That day he stopped trying to change the outside world. He began to change the only world that mattered, his inner one. Instead of worrying about what he didn't have, he focused on what he could create. He started visualizing success not as a faraway dream, but as something already unfolding. He stopped trying to escape failure and began to understand it. Each setback became information. Each obstacle became a signal, showing him where his thoughts were still small, where his faith still wavered. He realized that the universe is not resisting us, it is reflecting us. The shift was not loud or dramatic. It happened quietly, almost imperceptibly, as his thoughts began to align with belief instead of fear. He started waking up with a sense of calm instead of anxiety. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone or force progress to happen. He began to trust the process, because now his process began with the mind, not with the hands. Work became lighter. Ideas flowed more freely. The same situations that once frustrated him now felt manageable. Nothing in his environment had changed, but the way he perceived it had, and that made all the difference. He started noticing how people who succeeded were not always the smartest or the most skilled. They were simply the ones who believed most completely in their vision. They saw themselves already there long before anyone else could. They lived from the result instead of for the result. And he realized that was the missing piece all along: faith in unseen outcomes. Every great success is born twice, first in the mind, then in reality. Until it is born in thought, no amount of physical effort can bring it to life. He had spent years trying to change the reflection while ignoring the image. But once the image changed, everything else followed naturally. The people he needed began to appear. The opportunities he once chased began to find him. The world seemed to rearrange itself around his new state of belief. He finally understood that the mind is not a passenger in the journey. It is the steering wheel. Every thought is a direction, every belief a map. When the mind is pointed towards success, the body follows. He no longer measured progress by what he could see. He measured it by how clearly he could hold the vision in his mind. He knew that once the picture was clear inside, time would take care of the rest. What had once taken years of struggle now took months of focus. The energy he once wasted on doubt became fuel for creation. He began to live from the end. to act as though the goal was already done, and in doing so, his actions gained a new power. They carried conviction, they carried certainty, and certainty is magnetic. He learned that the world does not give you what you wish for. It gives you what you believe you are. So he stopped wishing and started believing. He stopped trying to earn success through effort and began to embody it through mindset. The work didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became purposeful, guided, almost effortless. He wasn't fighting anymore, he was flowing. And as his thoughts lifted, his life lifted with them. The same man, the same world, but a new perspective. And that one shift changed everything. He had spent years climbing the same invisible wall. Every morning he told himself that today would be different, that somehow he would break through and finally reach the life he imagined. He tried new strategies, changed jobs, switched paths, but the outcome was always the same: momentary progress followed by the same quiet fall back into frustration. He couldn't understand why some people seemed to move effortlessly through life while he had to struggle for every inch. He was not lazy, not careless, not unmotivated. He was simply stuck in a loop of effort without elevation. He worked on the outside but never realized the battle was being lost on the inside. The truth revealed itself in a single quiet realization. He had been acting like a machine when life required him to be a creator. He thought if he did enough, something would finally reward his labor. But life doesn't work through exhaustion, it works through awareness. He was trying to force success instead of flowing with it. His mind was full of doubt, fear, and scarcity, and though he didn't say it aloud, his actions carried the vibration of someone still uncertain of his own worth. That was the shift he had missed all along. He had been chasing outcomes without mastering the state of being that produced them. He began to see that every result in life is born from a single seed. The way he thought determined what he believed, and what he believed determined how he acted. Until that cycle was changed, the outcome could never change. He had spent years pruning the branches without touching the roots. Once he understood that, everything began to look different. He realized the world was not unfair, it was precise. It simply mirrored whatever image he projected most consistently from within. Instead of waking up in frustration, he began to wake up with intention. He stopped reacting to life and started directing it. He no longer said, "I'll believe it when I see it." He reversed it and told himself, "I'll see it when I believe it." That single thought carried more power than all his previous effort combined. He started visualizing his goals as realities already in motion, not distant dreams waiting to happen. He began to act from a place of completion, not from lack. And the difference in energy was undeniable. The same tasks he once resisted became enjoyable. The same goals that felt impossible began to unfold naturally. He noticed something extraordinary. Opportunities didn't appear out of nowhere, they had always been there. What changed was his ability to recognize them. His new state of awareness made him alert to openings he had previously overlooked. He no longer saw barriers, he saw direction. What used to be rejection now looked like redirection. The entire rhythm of his life shifted once he stopped fighting and started flowing. He realized that creation is not about controlling life, but cooperating with it. He learned that the mind is not just a tool. It's a living field that attracts whatever matches its dominant vibration. When he thought in terms of struggle, he met more struggle. When he began to think in terms of abundance, abundance began to respond. It was not a miracle, it was a law. He had simply been using the law in reverse all along, and now that he understood it, he used it with intention. Every thought became a choice, every feeling a signal, every belief a command to the unseen forces of life that shape reality. He began to replace thoughts of limitation with those of possibility. Instead of saying, "I can't," he started saying, "I can if I learn." Instead of dwelling on what went wrong, he asked, "What is this trying to teach me?" Slowly, the mental fog that had clouded his life began to lift. The same person who once doubted every move now walked with quiet confidence. He no longer needed external validation because his sense of purpose came from within. He realized that the world changes not when we wish it to, but when we evolve enough to meet it at a higher frequency. Work became easier, relationships improved, and ideas began to flow freely. He was no longer trying to prove his worth through endless effort. He understood that worth is something you accept, not something you earn. Once he accepted his own value, he naturally began to attract situations that reflected it. What once felt like random chance now felt like divine order. Every moment had meaning. Every delay had purpose. He saw that all those years of struggle were not wasted. They were training him to understand this one shift. Without the pain, he might never have looked inward. Without the frustration, he might have kept chasing external validation. It was only when he reached the edge of exhaustion that his awareness broke open. And when it did, the world he once thought was against him turned out to be for him all along. The same roads he had walked before now led to new destinations, because he was not the same person walking them. He had learned that the true measure of success is not how much you achieve, but how aligned you are with what you believe. When belief and action move together, everything begins to flow in harmony. What he once tried to force now happened naturally. The walls that once held him back were never real. They existed only in thought. Once he saw beyond them, there was nothing left to stop him. The shift was simple, yet it changed everything. For most of his life, he believed success was a matter of luck or timing. He thought some people were born with the right opportunities, while others were destined to struggle. He worked hard, often harder than those who seemed to get ahead, but his results never matched his effort. Every time he made progress, something would pull him back. Every time he built momentum, it seemed to fade just before the breakthrough. He blamed circumstances, people, and even fate, never realizing that the real barrier wasn't outside him. It was within him. He was trying to change his life without first changing the way he thought about life. It began to dawn on him that success is not something you chase, it's something you attract by the person you become. The problem wasn't the world. The problem was his perception of the world. He saw limitation where there was abundance, obstacles where there were opportunities. His thoughts had quietly built a wall between him and everything he wanted. And as long as that wall remained, no amount of effort could break through. It wasn't effort he was missing, it was alignment. Then came the moment of clarity, the one shift that altered everything. He realized that every outcome in life begins in the mind. The outer world is nothing more than a mirror of the inner one. He had spent years polishing the mirror, trying to fix what he saw, but never changing the image being reflected. Once he understood this, he stopped fighting the surface and started working on the source. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do?" he began asking, "Who do I need to become?" He learned that thoughts are not harmless. They are creative forces shaping reality with precision. Every repeated thought, every expectation, every belief, whether conscious or not, sends a signal into the world that draws back a matching experience. He started to notice how his mind automatically focused on what could go wrong. Every plan began with a silent doubt. Every idea was shadowed by fear of failure. Those tiny mental patterns, repeated daily, had quietly built the life he wanted to escape from. The only way out was to change them, to plant new thoughts, new expectations, new beliefs that aligned with the life he desired. It didn't happen overnight, but something subtle began to shift. He started speaking differently, thinking differently, walking differently. He began to visualize his goals not as distant hopes, but as realities already unfolding. He stopped worrying about how they would happen and started believing that they would. The more he held that belief, the more coincidences began to appear. The right people entered his life at the right time. Ideas came effortlessly. He felt lighter, calmer, more certain. What had once felt impossible now began to seem inevitable. He understood that faith is not blind optimism, it's mental discipline. It's the ability to hold an image in your mind long enough for the world to catch up. He trained his mind to focus on what he wanted instead of what he feared. Each morning he reminded himself that thoughts are seeds, and whatever he planted would grow. When frustration arose, he no longer reacted, he observed. He knew that worry was just imagination used in the wrong direction, so he redirected it. He began to imagine success so vividly that his subconscious mind started to accept it as fact. Slowly, everything began to align. The same work that once felt heavy began to feel inspired. He stopped forcing results and started flowing with them. Life began to cooperate with him instead of resisting him. Opportunities didn't just appear. They were drawn him by the frequency of his new thinking. He realized that he was no longer chasing success, he was radiating it. And that energy was magnetic. He began to see how most people live their lives backward. They wait for conditions to change before they change their thinking. They wait for success to believe they are successful, for wealth to feel abundant, for love to feel lovable. But he now knew the secret was to reverse it, to believe first, to think first, to feel first. Reality always follows thought, never the other way around. The mind is the cause, and life is the effect. He practiced gratitude not as a reaction, but as a state of being. Instead of waiting for good things to happen, he began to thank life in advance. This single act changed his vibration completely. Gratitude made him aware of abundance already present, and awareness of abundance attracts more of it. It was never about what he lacked, but what he chose to focus on. What you focus on expands, and what you neglect fades away. He stopped feeding doubt and started nurturing belief. Soon, he could look back and see the pattern clearly. The years of struggle were not wasted. They were the preparation for this understanding. They taught him the limits of hard work without mental clarity. He realized that success is not created by chance but by law, the law of cause and effect, the law of mind. Think abundance and you create abundance. Think limitation and you live within it. The law never fails, only our awareness of it does. The moment he began to master his thoughts, his circumstances began to obey him. The world responded to the clarity of his belief. It was never about luck, timing, or talent. It was about alignment, aligning thought, feeling, and action with the reality he wanted to live in. Once he understood that, everything he had been chasing began to come toward him. The struggle ended not because life became easier, but because his mind became aligned with the truth that life had been waiting for him to see. He spent years searching for the missing piece. He looked for it in books, in mentors, in success formulas, in the words of others who seemed to have found the secret he could not grasp. He tried everything that was supposed to work, yet each attempt ended the same way, with effort, exhaustion, and a quiet sense of disappointment. He was doing all the right things, yet life remained stubbornly unchanged. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that success wasn't about doing more, but about understanding something deeper. But he didn't yet know what that was. The realization came quietly, almost without warning. It wasn't a grand revelation, not a sudden miracle, but a soft and simple awareness that crept into his mind one morning. The awareness that he had been living from fear instead of faith. Every goal he set had been born from the desire to escape something rather than to create something. He wasn't moving toward vision. He was running away from doubt. And because of that, every action carried with it the vibration of resistance. He was building a life from the energy of what he didn't want, and the results always reflected that. That day, he decided to shift his focus from fear to faith, from survival to creation. It was not about pretending everything was perfect, but about realizing that what he believed most deeply was shaping everything around him. If he believed that life was hard, life became hard. If he believed opportunity was rare, it became rare. The outer world had always been mirroring his inner convictions, but he had been too busy reacting to see it. Once he saw the pattern, he couldn't unsee it. He began to think differently, slowly but deliberately. Instead of asking what could go wrong, he started asking what could go right. Instead of thinking about how far he still had to go, he focused on how far he had already come. He started to understand that the way he spoke to himself was programming the way life responded to him. Every negative statement was a command to the universe. Every positive one was a declaration of faith. Thoughts he realized were not abstract. They were living instructions shaping the field of his reality. He began to notice how subtle changes in thought created tangible changes in his experience. When he carried gratitude instead of frustration, people responded differently. When he acted with confidence instead of hesitation, doors opened faster. When he believed he was worthy of good things found him. It wasn't magic, it was alignment. The energy he put out was simply returning to him in matching form. What once seemed mysterious now appeared perfectly logical. He stopped waiting for external validation to feel secure. He stopped chasing after opportunities that didn't align with his sense of purpose. He stopped treating success like something distant and began to live as though he already belonged in the life he envisioned. His thinking grew calm, clear, and certain. There was no longer any rush, because he now understood that everything unfolds according to the clarity of one's belief. The need to prove himself disappeared, replaced by quiet assurance that the law of cause and effect never fails. Every morning he practiced the same mental discipline. He pictured the person he wanted to become and imagined himself already living as that person. He didn't ask whether it was possible. He simply assumed it was. He replaced worry with creation, doubt with decision, and fear with faith. Slowly, his outer world began to catch up with the inner one. Opportunities that once seemed out of reach started appearing naturally. The same path that once felt uphill began to feel guided, as though life itself was cooperating. He realized that he had been mistaking movement for progress. All those years of rushing, struggling, and forcing outcomes were unnecessary because they were misdirected. True progress came not from effort alone, but from clarity of mind. When your thoughts are aligned with your goals, your actions become efficient. When your beliefs match your desires, you no longer have to chase. You attract. Life becomes an unfolding rather than a pursuit. He learned that belief is the foundation of all achievement. You can only receive what you truly believe is possible for you. Every limitation he once accepted had been self-imposed. Every boundary he lived within had been drawn by thought. Once those thoughts changed, the boundaries dissolved. He was no longer confined by what had been, because he had redefined what could be. He began to treat the mind as the true source of power. Instead of reacting to events, he responded with understanding. Instead of allowing fear to dictate his direction, he let purpose lead the way. Each day he reminded himself that reality is flexible. It bends to the strength of conviction. He discovered that the only thing standing between him and the life he wanted was the belief that something was standing between him and the life he wanted. The more he practiced, the more effortless everything became. The struggle that had once felt endless was replaced by flow. The uncertainty that once paralyzed him was replaced by quiet knowing. The chaos of the past was replaced by order, and that order came not from control but from faith. He saw that success was not an event to reach, but a state to live in. The key had never been outside him. It had been in his mind the entire time, waiting for him to turn the key of belief and unlock the door to everything he had been seeking. He had always believed that success was a matter of chance, that some invisible hand favored certain people and ignored others. He thought maybe it was luck, maybe it was connections, or maybe it was something people were born with. For years he worked harder than anyone he knew, but the results never matched the effort. He watched people rise while he stayed in the same place. He changed jobs, changed plans, and tried new ideas. But no matter what he did, the outcome was the same. Something deep inside whispered that he was missing a truth so simple he had overlooked it. That truth revealed itself slowly. Through quiet observation, he began to notice that those who succeeded carried a different energy, a calm certainty that preceded results. They didn't seem to struggle, they flowed. Their words were confident, their actions deliberate. They believed in what they were doing before the world did. And that was the difference. They were not reacting to life, they were creating it. They had trained their minds to think from the end rather than toward it. That was the shift he had been missing. He realized that the mind was not a passenger. It was the driver. Everything he had experienced was the result of his own thought patterns, repeated so consistently that they became reality. He had been waiting for success to feel confident instead of realizing that confidence itself attracts success. He had been waiting for proof before believing, but proof only appears after belief. Life had been waiting for him to decide what he truly expected from it. Once he understood that, the entire game changed. He began to take responsibility for his thoughts the same way he took responsibility for his actions. He understood that every thought was a seed, and whatever he planted would eventually grow. For years, he had planted doubt, fear, and limitation, and life had obediently produced more of them. Now he began planting thoughts of abundance, faith, and purpose. He started small, simple affirmations, quiet moments of visualization, gratitude for things not yet seen. At first, it felt unnatural, but with repetition, it became his new default. The more he practiced, the more natural it felt. He discovered that the mind cannot hold two opposing thoughts at the same time. You cannot think lack and abundance together, fear and faith together, doubt and certainty together. One must dominate. So he began to discipline his mind the way an athlete disciplines his body. Every time a thought of fear appeared, he replaced it with one of faith. Every time worry tried to take root, he replaced it with a picture of things working out perfectly. Slowly, the balance began to shift. His dominant state became confidence instead of concern, creation instead of confusion. As his inner world changed, his outer world followed. The people around him noticed the difference before he did. He spoke differently, moved differently, carried himself differently. Situations that once caused frustration no longer disturbed him. He no longer chased opportunities, they began to find him. He wasn't the same person repeating the same patterns. He had changed the vibration from which he lived, and life simply matched it. What used to be effort now became expression. What used to be struggle became flow. He began to understand that success is not something you pursue, it's something you attract by the person you become. You don't get what you want, you get what you are. When you think thoughts of scarcity, you align with scarcity. When you think thoughts of abundance, you align with abundance. The law is exact, and it never fails. He had been working against it for years without knowing. Once he worked with it, everything began to shift in his favor. The key was not to force results, but to align mentally with them. He started to visualize his goals as already accomplished, to feel the emotions of gratitude as though they had already happened. That feeling became the magnet. The mind, once directed by fear, was now guided by vision. Each day he reminded himself that what he imagined consistently would soon harden into fact. He stopped doubting the process because he finally understood that every great achievement begins as a mental picture long before it becomes visible to the eyes. The outer world is only a delayed reflection of the inner one. He became patient, not because he no longer cared, but because he now trusted the unseen process of creation. He no longer questioned whether things would work. He focused on aligning with them until they did. He acted from a state of completion rather than from need. He no longer tried to attract things from a place of lack, but from fullness. That shift changed everything. It wasn't louder or faster. It was calmer, more certain, more powerful. He learned that the true secret of transformation is mental discipline. To train the mind to think on purpose instead of by habit. To hold one's attention on the vision rather than the circumstance. To stay faithful to an idea long enough for it to take form. This was the law he had ignored all his life, the law of mind. The law that whatever you hold in consciousness consistently must express itself in the world around you. Once he understood it, he no longer needed luck, chance, or waiting. He needed only to think clearly, believe deeply, and act decisively. The shift was complete, and from that moment forward, everything he touched began to grow.